Hey there, and welcome to Get Career Curious, the podcast that gives you the inside scoop on careers, what it takes to get there, and what the job is really like. This week, we're talking with Kjell Lundal, a true powerhouse in the world of investment banking. With more than 20 years of experience, Kjell has helped companies navigate over 120 major deals, adding up to a jaw-dropping $56 billion. He graduated summa cum laude from Washington University in St. Louis and earned his MBA with honors from MIT Sloan. So clearly, he's a really smart guy. If you've ever wondered what it's like to operate at the highest levels of finance or how to build a career that spans billions, this is the episode for you. And let's dive in. Kjell, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. We're super excited to have a guest like you and get to talk about, your career. I'm super interested, and I'm sure there's a lot of other finance and business related students who are on the same page. If you want to just go ahead and open up by telling us a little bit about what you do for work. I'm sure you get that question a lot, and it's not the easiest to explain, so feel free.
Absolutely. So maybe I'll rewind the clock a little bit just to kind of give you a bit about my experience, kind of what led me to doing what I do currently. So I went to undergrad at Washington University in St. Louis. I studied accounting. It was kind of a situation where I was really engrossed in the classes. I really enjoyed the content. It was kind of intuitive to me. I kind of like when, 1 + 1 = 2, if you know what I mean. So I also knew at the time, and this was kind of in the early 90s, I knew that an accounting degree was pretty much going to be guaranteed employment. A lot of places that you can take that and, make sure that you actually have a job once you finish up with school. So I graduated, had anticipated going to work for one of the big 6 public accounting firms at the time, and was fortunate actually to have offers with all 6 back in Chicago. But an interesting opportunity came up with a company in St. Louis called Monsanto, and they were looking for an internal auditor. So rather than doing kind of a public audit position where you audit a lot of different companies, an internal auditor is really just focused on the company for which you work. It was interesting. They were actually looking for an MBA candidate, but they were looking for someone that was bilingual. And at the time I was, my mother is from Colombia. So I at the time spoke pretty good Spanish. So I called the recruiting person and said, hey, I don't check all the boxes here, but could I interview for the job? And long story short, I wound up getting that opportunity. And it really was pretty life-changing in a lot of ways. I had not been fortunate enough to do a lot of international travel growing up. But during my time as an auditor for about 3 years, got to over 25 countries around the world, and was really able to kind of hone my overall business skills, but also my accounting skills that I was able to build up initially in undergrad. So, fast forward, I worked for that company for about 5 years, knew I wanted to do something different. So I decided to go get my MBA. And wasn't entirely sure what I wanted to do, but I thought probably it would either be private equity or investment banking. So I wound up going to the school at Massachusetts Institute of Technology. So moved out to Boston for a couple of years and decided that investment banking is probably going to be a good fit for me.
That's awesome. And Kjell, would you say that's sort of a traditional route to get into investment banking? I obviously understand it's a pretty competitive industry. So do they require you to kind of go with one certain path, or can you get into it from multiple avenues?
First of all, I'll say a lot's changed since I made that transition into investment banking. But at the time, certainly accounting graduates and those that kind of got an MBA had a pretty good opportunity to get in as an associate. And maybe to kind of back that up, the initial kind of, if you join from undergrad, you work as an analyst. The next step up is associate, then a vice president, then a director, then a managing director. So that's kind of the hierarchy, if you will. And at the time, if you wanted to join coming out of undergrad, they would take a lot of different majors. Economics was one, finance certainly was one, but accounting, and I've done a lot of recruiting in my career, accounting was always something that they really liked because you spend a lot of time with financial statements. And so being able to really kind of tear those apart, understand them, model them is a very highly valued skill. I think nowadays, I think one of the real challenges of breaking into investment banking is that the recruiting cycle starts so early. So literally, you have to make a strong commitment as a sophomore, as an undergrad, that's the route that you want to go. So making sure you take the right coursework, making sure you're doing a ton of networking, and of course get good grades and have a lot of activities that you're involved in. It starts very, very early, which is fine, but it really does force students to say, okay, is this really going to be a good career path for me, at least coming out of undergrad?
For sure. I think, especially from my experience, I think it's pretty much true as far as degree wise right now. Accounting's definitely sought after, and finance and econ are pretty close. So I don't think that's changed too much, but I agree the timeline has moved super far up, especially for internships and stuff like that. It's just becoming more and more competitive. Staying along that lines, if someone wanted to follow your path, what steps would you suggest they take, and maybe what are some learning moments you made on the way that you can give to our audience?
Yeah, I think a couple of things, and this kind of goes back to undergrad. I mean, one, I think it goes without saying, work hard, get good grades. I'm not one that's impressed by a 4.0 resume that has very little in terms of real activities, if you know what I mean. But good grades do matter. It shows a level of commitment, shows mastery of the of the information that the classes that you're studying. So that's one thing. Get involved. So don't just be a bookworm. Don't just study. Get involved in different types of organizations, whether it's sports, intramural sports, leadership opportunities, volunteer work is very additive to a resume. I'd say work experience is critical. So I was extremely fortunate, not to prolong the story too much, but I had a very small scholarship when I went to undergrad at WashU. And one of the scholarship sponsors was Motorola Corporation. They used to be very big into cell phones. So during my freshman year, I tried to make some contacts over at Motorola to say, hey, appreciate sponsoring the scholarship. It really means a lot to me. And oh, by the way, can I your internship program? So one thing led to another. So I wound up working 3 summers at Motorola, which provided outstanding work experience. Because by the time I was a senior, starting my senior year, I could say, look, I had 3 very solid summers of work experience that a lot of other students did not have. So I think that was very crucial for me getting my job, and then you really kind of being prepared to hit the ground running once I started at Monsanto. From that point, one of trying to remember who it was, one of my early managers when I was an auditor at Monsanto, he offered a very good piece of advice. He said, you need to manage your career. No one else is going to do that for you. So, I was like, okay, that's very interesting. I really have to be deliberate and think about the steps I want to take and where I want to be, 3, 4, 5 years down the road. So not that you can kind of look into the future and say, okay, here's where I'm going to be in that period of time, but you can start exploring. You can kind of think, okay, well, where do I want to go next based on what I know and what I don't know? And that's kind of what led me to the decision that I wanted to make a career change into investment banking. I knew some of my former classmates at WashU that had taken that route, and it sounded very interesting. And I kind of always knew I wanted to go and get my MBA, kind of what I was going to wind up doing after that. So, yeah, I think it'd be another takeaway is just being very deliberate about, your career path. And throughout that whole chain, networking is critical. So the more people whether it's through alumni networks, whether it's through friends of friends, you can usually find a pathway to talk to the people that you need to talk to. So I think that's really important. I think once I got into investment banking, I'd say probably the number one common denominator, if you will, for people that do well in investment banking is is hard work, is being a self-starter, being enterprising, so that you're not just being given work and you're processing it. You're thinking about, okay, why am I doing this? How can I do a better job next time? How can I take on more responsibility that maybe a VP above me does currently? And kind of taking that approach makes it a bit of a seamless transition, assuming you want to stay in that career. And I wasn't sure if I wanted to, but as I learned, as I got more senior in my role, I thought, this is great. This really challenges me in the ways that I want to be challenged. I guess going to your other point, some lessons learned. I would say, don't. It kind of goes back to my previous point about taking control of your career. And I was kind of fortunate to step back when I was still an undergrad. I knew I was going to do my accounting undergrad. I thought maybe I'll do the CPA track, do that. But I started to talk to people. I went to a CPA test, prep course, and the more I learned about it, I'm like, I really don't see that that's a good fit for me. The people that I know that do it didn't seem super happy with what they do. It's, I think it could be a great career if it's a good fit. But I was like, okay, well, maybe I need something a little bit more robust than just kind of a straight being an auditor or being a tax accountant, something like that. So, really kind of pressure testing your thinking early on, I think is really important. And being willing to take some risks. That first decision I made to join Monsanto rather than going the safe route to one of the big six accounting firms at the time was truly life-changing. And it was not an easy decision. I said, well, here I'm foregoing, six very good brand name companies that I know could potentially build a career there, or use that as a platform to take my career elsewhere. That experience is going to be valued, to something that was a little bit more of an unknown, but knew that I was going to have an experience that was going to be, like I said before, really, really life-changing, and really open up my mind to, that I don't know just my own backyard. I actually now have global horizons, which have really kind of, come to be an important part of both my personal and professional lives.
That's awesome, Michelle. And one thing that stuck out to me there, and I've heard a lot from many people in the finance business industry, is experience and just being able to really kind of get a taste of what you're going to be doing as a career. Going alongside that with internships, what advice would you give to people going about that? They're obviously super competitive. And also, maybe if you're not getting the top level ones, what's a different way you can get that experience, as you said, that you can make yourself stand out as maybe a junior or a senior later on in college?
Yeah. Well, I think first and foremost, any good work experience is better than none, right? So even if you're not out and you don't get the ideal internship, that, let's say you want to be an accounting undergrad, you don't get an accounting internship, well, if you weigh that versus going and working to be a lifeguard versus something that is at least more broadly within the business realm, well, that business experience is going to be helpful at the end of the day. So, think about it that way. Find something that's going to be additive to that end goal. I mentioned a few times that networking is critical, and a lot's changed, since I was, an undergrad, where you don't have the wealth of resources that you do now online and through things like LinkedIn, et cetera. But being able to find those pathways to talk to the people that you need to talk to, asking friends for favor, asking contacts for favors, asking your parents for favors, can be really, really helpful. And usually you talk to someone, and then I'd always ask, okay, anyone else you think I could talk to that would be helpful to build my network and to learn more about this as a potential career path. And before you know it, you're like, okay, you're making a pretty good network for potential jobs. But as importantly, you're able to say, okay, well, I understand what this guy does or what that gal does, and that sounds interesting, or it doesn't sound interesting. So you can really have a better standing to say, okay, for me to have the conviction to say, okay, I think this job at Monsanto that I took coming out of undergrad is really going to fit what I'm looking for. So that networking aspect is very important. I definitely tapped into the alumni networks, both at Washington University and at MIT. Back then it was, even then it was all starting to come online. So it was pretty easy to kind of find people and reach out to them, at least have a conversation. So that's kind of low hanging fruit. The other thing too, I'd say, and I can just talk about the investment banking path, but there are a lot of things that will really help round out your understanding of what it is an investment banker does, and more importantly, what an investment banking analyst does. So there are certain classes that you can take that are basically investment banking 101. So what's the day in the life of a first year investment banking analyst? There are classes that are a little bit more hands-on and technical, like training the street, I believe it's what it's called. And it's an intensive class that goes through valuation. How do you value companies? How do you build three-statement financial models? So some real technical skills that really better equip you to be in that interview situation, really nail the questions that you're getting because it makes sense to you, right? You say, okay, yeah, it makes sense. I remember in the class that I had, why we're talking about precedent transactions. So little things like that you can do on your own. Yes, it's probably going to cost a little bit out of your own pocket, but it's a great investment for helping you stand out into something that, as you mentioned, is very, very competitive.
That's what actually I was just about to ask, similar to that. How important are those hard skills? I think you just touched on about maybe going out and doing a course. You said you think it's very worth it. Do those hard skills really make an intern stand out or a young candidate for a job?
Yeah, absolutely. So if I were, just off the cuff to try to rank things, I mean, certainly I want to see someone that's very much a self-starter. So, I want to see a resume that really kind of jumps off the page that, this person is very involved in leadership activities, volunteers, being a president of a fraternity, being a captain on a sports team, whatever, things like that. I love seeing that type of leadership and involvement. But certainly, because in most cases, the interviews that you're going to have in investment banking are going to include some pretty deep technical questions. So those that have taken the time to kind of understand what valuation looks like, how to run a discounted cash flow model, how to do precedent transactions, how to look at comparable companies, how to translate different accounting entries, how those flow through the three financial statements. So things like that, yes, you can do a lot of that work on your own. And I'm sure there's abundant resources that are probably free online nowadays that you can do that. You can become very, very well studied so that even though you haven't worked as an investment banking analyst, you can kind of say, okay, I understand the skills that are needed to be effective. And I can be very fluent in my interview to say, okay, yeah, I know what you're talking about, and I can do a good job of communicating what you need to do in those situations.
Awesome. And talking about some of those skills, that's a good kind of transition point into your day in the life. Can you take us through what is a typical day in the life of an investment banker? What are some of the, tasks and skills that you're putting to work in the office?
Yeah. I think given the audience here, I'll maybe take that from the lens of kind of a more junior banker, so an analyst or an associate. They're doing a lot of processing. So you can really kind of look at work in two different buckets, kind of execution. So basically that's working on completing an M&A transaction or capital markets transaction. And then there's business development. So that's where you're going out, building relationships with companies, potential clients in the future, or actually in a live pitch. Maybe you've been invited to say, hey, we're thinking about selling. Can you come and represent your firm and tell us why we should hire you to take on this mandate? But it's going to be a lot of financial modeling and valuation, as I mentioned before. So being very fluent with how financial statements work, building those financial models, running sensitivities. So let's say, for example, what happens if sales decrease 10%, in 5 years? How is that going to impact valuation? Or, what happens if their cost of capital is higher or lower than what we're currently expecting? So being able to not just, do the plain vanilla modeling, but being able to toggle so you can look at a range of different sensitivities to kind of really help make your analysis that much more robust. Um, You'll do a lot of content creation. So a lot of what we do is PowerPoint based. Of course, a lot of that is financials and, tables and graphs, expressing or explaining financial information. But a lot of it is storytelling. So, for example, if you're doing a pitch and trying to say this is why we should get hired to represent your company, you're going to really have to show them this is how we're going to market your business. Showing some good depth of knowledge of, we really understand your business, why it should be valued by potential buyers. Here are the things that really make it click, and they're going to be very important to potential buyers. And expounding on those. And it's not just kind of putting words on paper, it's really kind of creating a whole story and a cohesive message that you say, we can go out to the market and achieve a great outcome for you. It's also a bit of market research. So senior bankers like myself, and we focus on particular verticals or end markets because we need to be experts in those end markets. But no two companies are alike, and there are going to be companies that aren't going to fit squarely right within that, within that vertical. So very oftentimes you're going to have to drill down a little bit further into a potential client's key markets. So what exactly they do. So an analyst or associate will sometimes really spend their time digging in to understand what key trends are, key success factors are in those particular markets, so that we can, again, explain those to potential buyers and show our mastery of that knowledge. And of course, there's going to be evaluation as part of those presentations, where you're going through your analysis in a great level of detail. And at the end of the day, showing, here's what we think based on what we know at this point in time. This is what we think your company is worth between X and Y. And it seems like it's pretty simple, but the devil's in the details. And kind of going back to some of those key success factors, I think attention to detail is paramount. That's something that I certainly had to learn as an associate, that every single number on a page, every single word on a page has to be 100% accurate. So you start to develop, tools and techniques to make sure that that's the case, so that the work I'm getting from my associates and my analyst and from my vice presidents is coming to me error-free. It's not to say I'm not going to have comments on it, but I don't want to see sloppy mistakes. So really having that discipline to double, triple check your work is something that, shows a lot of pride of ownership, and that you know what you're doing and you understand the magnitude of the work that you're doing for that potential client.
Well, you did a great job summing it up, Kjell, but there's obviously a ton that goes into your job. Can you take us through, what was some of your favorite parts as you were in the younger part of your career? And then what were some of the challenges that you kind of want to, warn people looking at this field about? And then also, how has that transitioned into what you do now? And what are some of the perks you get to enjoy later on in your career?
Yeah. I already kind of mentioned one, like just the absolute attention to detail is essential. So, you come up with different techniques. I mean, for me, it was, literally locking myself in a room and going page by page, checking every edit that we'd made to a presentation deck and doing it again. People have different ways of doing it, but for me, that seemed to work. And even to this day, I use that technique when I'm reviewing materials. I think the other major challenge, and it's not something we've talked about so far, it's a lot of work. I mean, investment banking is known as being extremely heavy workload, being unpredictable. So as an analyst, it's very common to be working 80 to 100 hours a week, and maybe even peaking above that. A lot has changed over the years for the better, so that we do look out, make sure that we're not burning out our junior resources. but it's something that really kind of never goes away. We're in the ultimate client service business. So if a client says, we need you to jump, and it's, 1 a.m., you jump and you get the job done and you do it really well. But point being is that you have to be very good, efficient, and focused on your time and how to prioritize your time, because you're going to be working on multiple projects. Have the knowledge to say, okay, I really need to focus my time here, and this is something I can maybe push, later into the day or later into the evening. So prioritization, but efficiency too. Just kind of picking up some tools of the trade, that you're, not recreating the wheel every time, that you become better and better at, running analyses. So pulling precedent transactions, running comparable companies analyses. You get better the more reps that you have doing that. So I think that's something that's extremely important. I think another challenge was, typically when you come in as an analyst or an associate, you're assigned either to a product group. So for example, you're going to be working in an M&A group, or maybe private placements or equity capital markets. So you focus more on transactions, those types of transactions, over many different industry groups. Or you get assigned to an industry group. So maybe you're assigned to industrials or to energy or healthcare or real estate. So that transition, as you become a little bit more senior and learn more, can become very difficult, because you're going to be expected to know that vertical a lot better than you did, when you were first year analyst. So for me, kind of getting into the energy sector, it was pretty overwhelming. It's a different language. It's different metrics. It's different financial modeling. So it was a very steep learning curve. But that's kind of what I liked. And I really liked the people that I worked within that industry, just very down to earth people I could really relate to. I could be sitting shoulder to shoulder with a billionaire and I wouldn't even know it, just given how humble that person was. But there is going to be that transition period where you have to have the mastery of the industry, but also the analytical skills to become a successful senior associate, or become a successful VP or director or managing director. So those things, with a little hard work and dedication, you cross those bridges. But I also think it speaks to one of the reasons why I've been doing this for over 25 years now. And that's that you really never run out of new challenges. So you learn a lot, you build your skill base, but no two clients are alike, no two transactions are alike. Your deal teams change. The financial markets are always changing. Industries are always changing. So it's never a dull moment, right? It's not like you're coming in, showing up to work every day, and it's the same thing you're doing over and over again. Every day is truly different. And for me, that's something that I really like. I like that variety. I like that new challenge, and it takes something to stay in this career for as long as I have.
For sure. And with that being said, investment banking is obviously a field with a lot of stereotypes kind of floating around. Are there any misconceptions about the career that, you would like to point out, or maybe are there any truths that you'd really like to highlight? I know obviously the hours are a big one.
Yeah. And there's no sugarcoating that. It's there. There's no getting around it. There's going to be a lot of hard work. I'll give an example. Like, a lot of very high performing graduates come into the investment banking profession, and they are taken aback when they get their first piece of work sent back to them with all this red marking on it. And, for them, it's like, oh my God, I'm a complete failure. I've never been told that I've done something wrong. And it's like, it's not that. It's just a very high bar for the type of work that we do, that has to be mistake free. It has to be correct. It has to be conveying the right message to our client or potential client. And we get it. That's not going to be intuitive for someone that's just getting into the industry. So that can be kind of a challenging, step change, if you will, for people just getting into the industry. Those that really kind of like scale up quickly are the ones that know how to learn from the feedback that they're getting, right? So if they say, okay, well, I thought I did this right, but I didn't, but now I understand it. So the next time I do it, it's going to be correct, or it's going to be that much better. It's having intuition to say, okay, well, Shell's asked me to do this as part of a marketing document, something that we call a confidential information memorandum. So I can think, okay, well, he's probably going to ask me for this next. So maybe I can start doing some work on that. I can kind of anticipate needs. Um, as you get more experience, you can kind of make those calls. And for me, that's huge. I say, okay, I'm getting a lot of leverage. I'm getting a lot of added value from the team that's working for me because they can make those intuitive decisions. And the reason they can do it is because they've applied themselves. They have confidence to rely on the skills that they've built, and they're willing to maybe, make a mistake. Maybe they put together a couple of pages for me to review. Maybe it's all wrong, but I love the fact that they took that step to say, I'm going to give it a shot, and let's see what happens. So being able to take that initiative and have some confidence around it, I think is really important. You hear a lot that there are a lot of sharp elbows within investment banking. It's very cutthroat. That certainly can be the case, but I'll say that differs from firm to firm. It differs from even within the same firm. It's going to differ between different industry groups. So, you just never know. You never know. But yeah, you're amongst a lot of very intelligent, highly motivated, aggressive for the most part, people that, yeah, it's not going to be a cakewalk every day. But again, I think that the key message here is that a lot has changed. So, when I was kind of going through the ranks, 25 years ago, the well-being of associates and analysts wasn't really, people didn't really care that much. I always say when my son was born, I took off half a day of work, and that was it. Now most firms offer paternity leave, so both men and women can take off work to be with their newborns, which is great. That's a good step change in the right direction. But back in the day, it kind of shows like, well, it's work, and that's it. So some of those things have changed, but again, when the rubber hits the road, when stuff needs to get done, if you have an impending deadline, there's not much you can do to dance around that. You really kind of have to do what's necessary and produce a great outcome for your client or prospect.
Sure. And something that stuck out to me that you said, Shell, and that you've kind of repeated is the ability, especially for young investment bankers, is to learn from your mistakes. And something that I hear a lot is, finding a mentor in the industry. How important would you say did you find a mentor that kind of taught you, and how for young people would you go about earning the respect of an elder in industry with, such competitive individuals?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think it's critical, especially if you're looking for any kind of longevity in investment banking. But I look back over my 25 years, and I'd say I had three really great mentors. The first one was kind of my first boss, coming out of graduate school. And, granted, he was one that was kind of showing me the ropes, but he laid something out to me that's kind of stuck with me all these years. Obviously, it's a lot of hard work. It's a lot of hours. It's a lot of sacrifice. And he put it in a very good way. As you probably know, and maybe folks don't, but the way you're compensated in investment banking is very much weighted towards your annual bonus. So, right. So you have a base salary, but really where you make your money is an annual bonus. So as some people joke, every year you go from hero after your bonus to zero, right? So trying to make new revenue for the coming year. But this managing director, again, this was kind of my first year out of graduate school. He said, every year after I get my bonus, I step back and ask myself a few questions. Am I still having fun? Do I still like the people I work with? Am I still engaged with the work that I'm doing? Am I still motivated to do a great job in the work that I'm doing? Am I getting to, do other things like spend enough time with my family or other priorities if you don't have a family? And the more that you can check those boxes and say, yeah, yes, 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 then the more likely I am to re-up and say, okay, I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing because it's fulfilling. As soon as that starts to break down, he said, that's probably going to be a sign that I need to start thinking about a different career path. And so it's been a very valuable tool for me to take that helpful step back each year and say, okay, is this what I still want to keep doing? And for me, that answer has been yes. But it is kind of a healthy thing to do, I think, in any career, quite frankly. The other two mentors, two folks that I worked with, they were very instrumental in a couple of different areas. One was just in kind of client management, client development, client management, because they were both excellent at developing new relationships, maintaining new relationships, and also just being industry experts. They were great being in meetings and just be able to talk so fluently about their industry, why it matters to that client or prospective client. And then I think also would be creativity. So they were both very creative, whether we're putting together a new pitch, putting together a confidential information memorandum, if we're thinking about how we need to analyze something, some kind of a financial analysis or industry analysis, how we might think about things a little bit differently. So, I really like their approach. That's not just a cookie cutter, here's what we did last time, so here's what we're going to do this time. It's like, well, let's really look at how we can add value to the situation. And maybe we want to take a different approach because that's what our client needs or that's what our client is looking for. So kind of taking that lens into what I do now has been very, very helpful. All three of those folks, I've learned a lot, and it continues to help me to this day.
That's great. And finally, we're kind of getting to that last segment of how, the future of investment banking. And you've touched a lot on how a lot of things have changed since you stepped into the industry. How have you gone about, adapting to that? And what advice would you give to the younger generation stepping into the finance industry, and especially with today's world and everything's getting a little crazy?
Yeah, of course. Now the big question is like, okay, what industries are going to become obsolete because of AI, right? Certainly, there are aspects of AI that are starting to bleed into our industry. And all investment banks nowadays use AI for intelligence gathering. So if we're working on a pitch, for example, and we need some information or ideas on some trends that are happening within a certain area or things that are happening in a certain company, we can tap into different AI tools to help us with that. But at the end of the day, there's no replacement for advice that is put through the lens of experience. So having bankers that have been in the trenches, been through many transactions, worked with many different clients, that adds a level of experience that is really kind of hard to replicate with any kind of technologically driven tools, including AI. So that's why I don't think investment banking is going to go away. I do think the analyst job, and again, that's kind of the entry level position, I do think their job should get easier. And maybe let me frame that a little bit differently. I think their jobs are going to change a little bit because I think there's going to be more opportunity for a lot of the grunt work, a lot of the busy work to become automated, or having more tools to reduce the amount of time it takes you to run certain analysis, to where you can really start to devote more of your time to what I'd call truly more value added, type activities. Just to kind of give you a sense for how far things have come. Went back in the day when I first got involved, when we were doing what we call a comp sheet. So we're looking at some publicly traded companies. How do they trade? What sort of valuation multiples they trade at, so that we can compare that to our client or potential client. And that used to be a very manual exercise, literally going through financial filings, making manual adjustments to those filings, and, kind of putting together that comp sheet. And it was a very long, arduous process. And you'd have your comp file, full of all these printouts of SEC filings. Nowadays, you can do a lot of that by just the touch of a button. It's going to run comps. You have different databases that will do that. It still requires a lot of verification, right? It's hard to kind of just take all that at face value and say, hey, we ran our comps, here you go, Shell. You still have to use some judgment and some scrubbing of those numbers. But, the days of kind of going in and tearing apart, financial statements and manually coding all that information into your comp sheets has pretty much gone away. So, an example of how far technology's come, and I think we're, who knows what the future is going to hold, but that's kind of the trajectory that we're on is we're going to find ways to automate, have stronger tools to really help out analysts and associates, doing a lot of that analytical work.
That's awesome. Well, Kjell, I'm wrapping up here with the questions for you. My final one, and feel free to add, any words of advice at the end as well, is if you could do it all over again with your career, is there anything that you would change or maybe, build off of?
Yeah. A good question. I don't think there would be much I could change. I mean, like I say, it's, you do go through a lot of sacrifice, taking this on as a career. So I think you really have to go in eyes wide open. And, I think I did, but I wasn't super close with anyone that had a long career in investment banking. I knew some people that were analysts, for sure, and told me about their lifestyle, but someone that had really had that as a longer career, I didn't necessarily, know a whole lot in terms of what it's going to mean to be a VP and eventually become a managing director. So it would have been kind of helpful just to anticipate and to know a little bit more what to expect, because, the hours really kind of never go away. The stress really never goes away. So you do, wind up making a lot of personal sacrifices in doing that. With all that said, my daughter is a third year analyst, soon to become associate at a investment bank in New York. And, it's a situation where she was able to go in eyes wide open. I mean, just in talking to me, but, she grew up her whole lifetime when I was working in investment banking. So she saw the pros and cons of that uncertainty and those long hours. And so was really able to make an informed decision, like, yeah, this is something I want to do, or it's really not for me. So, so doing as much diligence, talking to folks, really, really understanding what the role is very important. And I'd say the other aspect of that, and again, I think there's so many more resources and tools out there for people that are thinking about getting into investment banking that they can really tap into, but really having a great grasp of what the role is before stepping into that interview, even if it's just informational, but really kind of crafting in your mind, here's what an investment banking analyst does. Here's what an associate does. It's going to make you smarter. It's going to make you come across as really being bought into the idea of pursuing that as a career. And when presented the opportunity, it gives you the ability to say, okay, yeah, I know what this is going to entail, and I'm not going to be surprised by too many things if I do say I want to take that step.
Sure. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Kjell. I know personally as a finance student, this meant a lot to me, like investment banking's an industry you hear a lot about, but don't get, all the information with. So I just, again, like to thank you for coming on and Get Career Curious today. I know my mom appreciates it as well. So
well, good.
Thank you.
Happy to do it. Well, thanks, Nolan. Best of luck.
What a conversation. As we wrap up today's episode of Get Career Curious, let's hit pause and reflect on some of the standout lessons from Kjell Lundal's remarkable journey through investment banking. First, Kjell reminded us that getting your foot in the door is just the beginning. What really matters is seizing opportunities as they come, even if the path looks a little different than you expected. Sometimes taking a risk on an unconventional job can open doors you never imagined. Second, he emphasized the importance of building a strong foundation. Yes, grades matter, but so does getting involved outside the classroom. Leadership roles, internships, and real-world experience are what make your resume pop, and more importantly, prepare you to hit the ground running in your first job. Third, Kjell was candid about the realities of investment banking. It's a career that demands hard work, attention to detail, and a willingness to learn from people, even when it's delivered with a lot of red. But he also shared that the rewards go beyond the numbers. Every day brings new challenges, new industries, and new people to learn from, so it's never boring. And finally, perhaps the most timeless piece of advice, take control of your own career. Don't wait for someone else to chart your path. Be deliberate, seek out mentors, and continually ask yourself if your work still brings you joy and purpose. If it is, keep going. If not, don't be afraid to pivot a new direction. Thank you for joining us today. Our goal is to help our listeners discover meaningful careers that bring them joy and purpose. If you have a friend who might benefit from today's discussion, please share this episode with them. If you're ready for more career stories and honest advice, hit subscribe and please join our community. Thank you again for joining me, Nolan Hollis, on this episode of Get Career Curious, and we will see you next time.